What's up?
Hey, how you
Getting
going?
some water. You hear me all right?
Yeah, no stress. A lot of the times we don't mention that, but that charisma is very important in raising funding. Yes, you can have a great customer focus, you can have great funding numbers, but if you can't tell the story of how you can be $1 billion company, no one's going to give you money. No rational person should be doing this. And even then, you're probably from the numbers, you're probably not going to get rich off building a startup as well. So in some ways, you're just a crazy person. So I think even taking that first step towards entrepreneurship, you're pretty courageous and you have a lot of perseverance. At the end of the day, one bad project could ruin your entire company if it's done incorrectly. So it's starting from the problem statement, then using AI as the best solution for it. We've been doing a bit of marketing agency work for startups, and every time we do it, that's what we tell them. So we're seeing the rise of independent media on Substacks because people want to listen to people and they don't trust companies. I don't trust a company, but hey, Seth, I know you. I feel like I know you because I've listened to your episodes. I know your biases, and everyone has biases, but as long as I know that and I'm aware of that, I'm willing to listen to you. If the random customer service manager at a company is posting content, I'm like, oh, that's super interesting. I didn't expect that. They must love the company, to be able to be incentivized to do that. So I think that's a really interesting strategy which is coming up.
Welcome back to Constructive, everybody. Today I get to talk to somebody that I've had a little bit of a relationship with, but got to meet in person and walk around. I'm sorry that I didn't get to show you a construction project in action. We really wanted to do that. Next time, I'm going to make an effort to get you to an actual construction site. But basically, this podcast, like I always say, is kind of a sandwich of construction and technology. And you kind of fit right there in the middle of those two things, in my opinion. I'd love to hear, do you mind starting with Formwork Labs? You're kind of fresh off that experience. Can you talk about how it originated? And I'll ask you a bunch of questions about it, but start wherever you want.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess for a bit of context there, I took a sabbatical off my role as being a civil engineer. So, working on sites, and my last role was in innovation, doing some AI training programs. And then, it took 12 months on a sabbatical, so still partially through that. And I spent some time running content at Formwork Labs. So Formwork Labs, for those who don't know, it's a construction tech accelerator program, and it runs for 3 months every year. And basically, startups come in with an idea or a minimum viable product, and we help them go to market for the construction industry. So teaching them about construction, but usually they also have a pretty good idea. Teach them about general startup stuff and how to build businesses, so the legal considerations around that. But then also just introducing them with customers or mentors, and just continuous conversations so they can iterate and they can learn there. And then, I was just helping out on the content side. So trying to do everything that they've done for the last 4 years kind of privately behind the scenes that people haven't really heard about, and just make it public and share to the industry, what are we trying to do? How do we get more people to understand what we're doing? And also how can we get more people involved? Because these programs don't run in isolation. They need people like yourself. They need, anyone from the industry who's willing and interested in talking to founders to build better products. We want all those people. But I guess the way I got into it was a little random. I just knew Alice and Curtis and a few of the brick and mortar team, which runs that accelerator program pretty well. So when I was at AECOM or previous role, we had a bit of a startup investment team. So through that, we got to know a little bit of the funds. And, I'd known Alice for a while, and I was just kind of hey, I'm thinking about taking a sabbatical. It'd be great if we could line up so that I could, get a bit of experience on the ground of what the tech side's doing and what startups are doing. Yeah, and then she was just yeah, sure, why not? So that's kind of how it all ended up, and it was very kind of a little bit laid back in that way, which was really nice knowing Alice. And it just everything worked out, so I'm pretty glad for that.
And I'm glad you ended up in that opportunity because it brought you out here and I got to meet you in person. But I wonder, it kind of makes me think of a parallel even in my sector of the industry as a project manager on construction projects is visibility of what we're doing. You were mentioning that from a startup standpoint too, I understand the value in being a stealth startup. I get it. There's very good reasons for keeping some of what you're doing under wraps. But I agree with you that I think that visibility of these things, what I've been noticing is when I get to talk to some of those founders of the early startups, they are craving feedback. Like you were just saying, they want it, they need it. And they need that feedback. So how do you like walk that balance between beam of like, we can't give away our secrets, but sharing is good for everybody, right?
Yeah, and I think so, like for a lot of those startups, it's just understanding what their differentiation is and like where they personally see the IP. For some of them, they might say, hey, it's like the product and the way that we're building. And for those people who believe that, I guess they tend to be a little bit more from the industry background, or they've been in the industry for longer. And they're like, hey, like we just want to build this for 3 to 6 months, not tell anyone, and then go to market because they feel like they have that validation because they're building for themselves. But then on the other side, it's like, hey, like we need feedback and we know we need feedback. And what we're building, yes, it's valuable, but often in construction, distribution or go to market can also be a moat. So yes, like you have a great product, but someone else might have the great product, but they just have a better network. So they can get to customers faster and people trust them more. Because like, if you, Seth, told me that, hey, I'm building a product, I'd be like, yeah, I trust you. I know you. I'm going to use your product versus X founder who's building the exact same product for me. So like just understanding that is really important. And when you do get feedback, you're also building that relationship and building that trust over time. So that also allows you to be like, hey, I took on your feedback. Can I sell you this product as well? So I think a lot of these feedbacks can be really useful. And what we did find was a lot of these like feedback conversations turned into customer conversations of, hey, can I have a regular catch up with you? Hey, this is our products, changing. And they go, oh, like I've given you feedback. You've incorporated my problem statement, or like are solving for my problem statement. Why don't I just use your product and like give it a trial run?
That makes me think about, don't you agree with me? I've always pushed this on tech companies is like do more beta, like give it out for free more at the beginning. I don't know. And I think they do that. I'm just saying keep doing it because yeah, and I wouldn't say like, I always think about pricing products because I'm like, you don't want to underprice your product because there's a bunch of reasons not to do that. You want people to value it highly, but I think giving it away for free in a test period is really good. Did you see that to produce value or?
Yeah, well, it's a tough one because you see both sides of it. Like I think like some models can work on a freemium basis, but like we also found that if you gave your trial for free, you didn't have the buy-in internally that was required. So people actually would be like, oh, it's free. Like I'm not gonna not like necessarily waste my time, but it's like, hey, like I'm not losing anything if I don't use this solution as well. So like sometimes you just didn't have that buy-in. So it's say like even just putting some kind of money in front of them, even if it's nominal, it like gets them that buy-in of, oh, I'm spending it. I have to actually do this now. And then from an executive level, there's a little bit more like, of a push of like, hey, like we're spending money on this. This is the project budget. But yeah, one of the actual harder things is like actually getting people to go, hey, I'm going to spend some time learning your solution because we are pretty overwhelmed in terms of how much work we have to do on a construction side or in the industry. And like, no one's really, if you give me a new solution and I try and it just doesn't work, I'm going like, I'm just doing what I always did. Right. So like trying to get that buy-in. And if my PM comes up to me and goes, hey, like we spent 5K for this trial for 3 months or whatever it is, I'm going, all right, like I guess we spent money on it. I have to figure it out now. I've got to spend a little bit more. So like you sometimes get a little bit more push and a bit more buy, but it really does depend on the product.
That makes sense. Do you think you learned kind of what makes a good founder? Or I'm sure it's so wide question because you can be any personality type in my opinion, but like what were some of the universals about like what made good founders from your perspective, especially construction?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's like a little variation in that. Like on one side, I think what makes a founder really great for construction and understanding us is just like one, being able to talk to someone who is from the industry, because like I don't know about you, but like definitely there's people who are like, hey, I don't want to talk to you because you don't seem like one of us. So that's one important. And then two is just like being really willing to incorporate feedback and not being combative when they receive feedback, because sometimes there's a tendency to go, hey, oh no, like this is the way you should be doing it. And it's like, no, like you're the customer and you're going to be building a product for them and build that trust and lead them to where you are. So like I think that ability to have, hey, this is what my product vision is, but be flexible in updating that product vision based off feedback. Because like the customer might not be right. Like each customer has different perspectives, but being able to incorporate from, 5, 6 different customers and see those commonalities and be flexible with what you think your vision is and your hypothesis is, and consistently updating that, because yeah, you need to have a vision, but you have to be willing to change that vision. And then on the other side, I think some of the things that we probably don't touch on often, but it is very true, is like that ability to kind of sell a story and present yourself well. A lot of the times we don't mention that, but that charisma is very important in raising funding and like convincing an investor to say, hey, like I'm going to put $1 million, $1.5 million in your like seed round, right? Like I don't think we talk about that enough. And you really do see how being polished as a founder, being able to present well and like saying those right words, which, feels like corporate speak sometimes. But the founders who were able to do that, and we saw them, investors love that, right? And they found it a lot easier to raise fundings than just being like, hey, like, yes, you can have a great customer focus, you can have great funding numbers, but if you can't tell the story of how you can be $1 billion company, no one's going to give you money.
Yeah, because it is like I see both sides to a lot of these things you're bringing up. Like, you want, as a construction tech company, I think there's a lot of value in someone with a construction background. I think there's also a lot of value for someone from completely other industry, like tech maybe, to come in and think about construction differently. So I don't think it's a positive or a negative either way there. But I think the thing you brought up that is universal is storytelling, like the charisma aspect, storytelling. Like, can you but I want to talk about that too, because I think there is like a balance between like, do you want the guy who sounds really good or the guy who's really smart? Like sometimes it is that kind of question, not always, but if you're the really smart guy and you can't talk very well, like maybe you get somebody that's good at talking really well, but they come across fake to the client. Does that ever happen? Is there that level of nuance?
Definitely. And I think that's like where it comes down to the founding team and like having a founder or like a series of founders who are, self-aware enough to understand their own shortcomings and then like overcome it. And I think it's really interesting because we like had a chat with Phil Lorenzo, who is one of the mentors at Formwork Labs, but he like is at Drone Deploy and he's like sold multiple startups in construction tech. So like Construction Site was his last one. Something he said was that like in his first startup, he realized he hated to sell and he just like wasn't good at it and he didn't like it. So his second startup, he got a co-founder who's actually great at selling and he doesn't have to do any of those conversations and he can just focus on product and building. So I think like, yeah, like it is really important to understand what your shortcomings are, either hire to resolve those shortcomings or bring on a co-founder if you're early. And if that person like seems fake and doesn't talk from the industry, then don't hire them, don't work with them. But like I think what is very important as you start scaling and building a company is like the ability not only to sell to your investors, but to sell a story to your employees and to the people in your company of, hey, like you should work for me. This is a vision that we're going towards. And this is why it's important that, we worked together towards this future. And this is how, our leadership team complements each other and like works on each of the skill sets that we don't have, right? Like when you hire your head of sales, they need to have, all this understanding that you potentially don't have, but you've already done sales enough to know what a good sales hire looks like, what kind of playbooks and information you need to pass on to them so that they can take leadership and ownership of that. But you have to understand where your shortcomings are, and that's going to dictate your initial hiring or co-founder strategy, right? So you might be like, hey, for sales, we don't need software because this person can be like a CTO for a period of time.
Okay, we talked about the people you met while doing this stuff, but what about the ideas? Like, what to you stuck out as like what makes a good idea for a startup as opposed to a bad one? Can you kind of put any common themes in those things you saw?
That's a great question because it's hard to answer that because the idea that they come in with isn't necessarily the idea that they walk out with. Going back to like the feedback that you receive, I think you need to have a hypothesis that makes sense when you walk in. So it could be like, Sonar Labs with material tracking and like and being able to distribute that within companies. Like that makes a lot of sense. what they walked out with, is like a variation of that thesis. And I think it's understanding that the market they've chosen probably has the size and the ability to facilitate a unicorn. But at the end of the day, like sometimes they pivot even completely away from what they've done. And I think it really, like at that early stage, which is like, this is pre-seed. So it's just two co-founders or like three co-founders. There's no one else in the team. It really is the team. It really is the people, because if you have a great team, you can always change ideas and build a great product. But if you have a great idea, but a team that isn't very good, they might not necessarily be able to execute. But if you have great people, they're always going to figure it out, and they're flexible enough to change the position. So I think like, yes, like at the early stages, Alice was definitely like seeing the product, understanding that if they understand the construction industry, understand what their product is, what their vision is, but then also recognizing in 3 or 4 years' time, your product's going to look very different.
So maybe like that flexibility is important. Maybe that's a quality, is like the ability to change, pivot a little bit. But I wonder too, okay, so maybe it's not the idea as much as I might think it is, and it's the team. How do those teams, are there formulas for, maybe flexibility is part of it, but what is the formula for having a team come up with a good idea that really can sell? Or can you probably already covered that a little bit, but
I mean, I think it comes down to like understanding where that entrepreneurial gap is, right? And that comes from customer conversations. I don't know, your backstory of how you started the Constructive Podcast, but you definitely noticed either a personal pain point or multiple people coming up to you and saying, hey, like we need X, right? We need a place to talk about technology and improve its awareness in the industry and to assist with adoption. And I think that same process of, hey, I'm talking to customers, I'm seeing a personal pain point. And what it does is like when you talk to enough people, even like 5 to 10, you start to notice commonalities and threads. And then from that, you go, okay, like what's the best way to solve that? That answer isn't necessarily a company. But if it is a company, you're going to start to think about certain things like, hey, is this problem big enough to facilitate a particular solution? Because some people, like for a startup, it has to have that market size. But if you just want a small to medium sized business, it's a very different consideration. But exactly what you've done with the Constructive Podcast of talking to people and everyone going, hey, like this is my problem statement, this is what I'm not finding, and then how your content has also changed over time. So your first podcast probably looks very different to how you interview today and the questions you ask today. And that reflection is both, the audience of me as the guest, but also the feedback that you hear from people, because people are going to come up to you and say, hey, like I would love it if you asked about X. I would love it if you asked about Y. And it just slowly changes. So I think it's not about having a great product to start with. I think it's more about starting. And if you're doing something that people want or are interested in, even loosely, they'll give you feedback and they'll tell you, hey, actually, I think this is what I really want. And if enough people, you start shifting your content or shifting your product towards that direction until you hit like that critical mass of, hey, like we have a big enough readership, we have a big enough audience, we have a big enough customer base. And I think that's what it is, right? Like we change so infinitesimally through the choices that we make. And over time that compounds into, hey, like look at this new vision and product. But in reality, it's like these small little changes every single day. But you have to get your product out. You have to be getting feedback. You can't just live in your head.
Yeah, I want to also, because I 100% agree with you, but I also want to present the flip side of that coin too, which I think is true because I get it on this. I, in fact, had a lot of people tell me don't start a podcast. But you're totally onto it. Like I spent my whole career thinking, why can't I find this information? Or why aren't there more resources for someone that just wants to learn about the industry? And so it was my personal pain point, but I've noticed other people have it too. I just don't think I've mastered the everybody wants to hear from me yet. But I do want to say too that be prepared if you want to disrupt and innovate for people to tell you you're an idiot, and just be like, that's okay if you think that. I am going to keep going.
Yeah.
Did you see like perseverance as an important quality?
Yeah. I mean, like, these people start and in week 1, they're like, can we get a pilot? And everyone says no, right? They don't trust you. They don't know you. Your product's frankly just not there yet. by week 12, you start to see, hey, there's a little bit of rumblings of conversations. That sales cycle in construction is so long. And I was just catching up with, a couple of founders recently from the program. And it's like, how long are we now? We're like 5 months away from it. And they're like going, hey, like we're just like closing another customer that we met, right? That it takes that long. They have to build a few features for them. And at the end of the day, like, I often think like, why do people want to be entrepreneurs or like build startups? Because it sucks. Like, it's great. Don't get me wrong. Like when it works, it's very rewarding, but it also sucks because no one's there with you in the day to day where you're working like, yeah, they're pulling all nighters, right? Like their teams offshore. So they're like in the US and then they have like India or European based teams and they're like working all night to do a software feature development so that in the morning they can present on it. And it's like, no rational person should be doing this. And even then, like, you're probably like, from the numbers, you're probably not getting rich off like building a startup as well. So in some ways, you're just a crazy person. So I think even taking that first step towards entrepreneurship, like you're pretty courageous and you have a lot of perseverance. Because I don't know about you, like with people telling you not to do a podcast, I'm sure a lot of them, especially in construction, say, why are you building a company? Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Overcoming that. And then like, once you're on this pathway, the ball just keeps rolling. I think you get like more and more conviction and more seriousness. And it is fun, but I think it's very challenging. And I saw them like bleary eyed in the morning of, hey, like we have, the Formwork Labs demo day. We need to fix a bunch of things before this demo day and there's not enough time. And you just see that and they pull through.
Let's talk a little bit from like the other side of the industry, the users of these tech startups, but because I think it's somewhat a myth going around a lot lately, which is construction is extremely slow to innovate. And I wonder if you can help me kind of bust that myth. Is that changing? Has it changed? Is it gonna change? Can we stop saying that yet?
Yeah, I think that like my kind of refusal or refutement of that statement is I think people just don't understand quite the industry dynamics sometimes. So like from a contractual structure, like the contract structure perspective, you might get $10 million for a project and that's your lump sum. And if you do that project for $8 million, then you get 2 million. But if that project goes to $15 million, well, you eat that cost, right? So at the end of the day, one bad project could ruin your entire company if it's done incorrectly. And like there's been cases of big construction companies in Australia when COVID happened and material prices increased, just got absolutely blown out of the water because they were underbidding just to keep their staff. So like when you have this scenario of, hey, thin margin, but like the other side is your entire company is at risk if that project goes really bad, well, then it's like, do we really want to change the process? Because we know if we continue our current process, we'll get a 3 to 5% margin, right? That's a standard GC margin, which is very small. But if we change our process, maybe we get 6 to 7%. But if we implement and we screw up the implementation, and if it's like something important like an ERP system and that breaks down, well, guess what? We're not going to be on budget. We're going to have delay payments and we could be down 20%. So I think what it comes down to is just like understanding the risk profile of the industry, understanding how your product impacts the risk profile of that project, and then understanding what it takes to build enough trust to actually get adoption on site. And if you're in something that is more risky, well, the velocity of adoption is going to be slower, but the stickiness of the solution will be longer. So yes, it'll take 2 years to get a customer, just say, or like something ridiculous. But that customer will be your customer for the next 20 to 30 years because they're not changing that system. So I think it's just really understanding, hey, this is how the industry works. This is where we slot into it. And this is how I can negotiate or mitigate the risk associated.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that it's a myth, and this is the way I was thinking about it. Kind of feel free to poke holes in it, but I was thinking about it and like everybody always asks, why can't there be an Amazon or Tesla or Uber or IKEA for construction? And in my mind, there's like a big element of that it's a geographic constraint. You can't have a contractor do every project in the US, let alone every project in the world. It wouldn't be smart for one company to take over construction because of the geographic restraint. But I think the bigger companies are innovating. I see it. Like, it's very obvious to me, drones are being used, great tech solutions are being used on the billion-dollar projects. Like, it's definitely there. It's just on the $1 million and below projects, like, we're not caught up to that innovation. And that's a problem that I'm trying to address just with like knowledge sharing. But I think also the problem is small construction companies have that problem you were just talking about even worse, because their margins are already thin and they don't have like other projects in other areas that will keep them whole if something goes wrong. Do you
And they don't
agree?
have dedicated innovation resources, right? Like they just don't have the
Mm.
time to implement. And I think like, yes, geographic constraints, definitely, because we have kind of diseconomies of scale. Like I don't know if you have it there, but the regulation changes from state to state. And for us, like you're a registered engineer in Victoria, but only in Victoria. So you can't actually do a design in Queensland. So like different regulations for how engineers can operate and like testing requirements start to hit into that. And I think like something else that's important is like there isn't really a standardization of product. Like, you can have a standardized car with customization. We've tried a lot in homes, but does the demand and the amount that people buy actually facilitate this massive factory setup, especially because you need geographical locations and the ability to potentially ship either flat pack or even volumetric homes is very challenging compared to a car. And then something else that we've seen is like if you read construction physics, he goes pretty deeply into when in the past in the US there was kind of manufacturing homes and it worked, I think, in like the late 60s to 70s when there was the boom. But then demand just doesn't maintain that level of people continuously building houses. And he like goes quite deeply into that process. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And then you've also got to think about like how the industry is structured, which is like asset light, right? Like the GC doesn't usually have any labor on staff. They just subcontract everything out. And the subcontractors are specialty subcontractors and they're not in-house because, a concreter wants to be able to work for 5 or 6 different GCs across a particular region because no one GC has the demand for that amount of work and is winning enough work. So what you're starting to see instead of like the Cartera model or the Tesla model is asset light of, hey, like, yeah, we're a prefab builder, but we don't own our factories. Instead, we have like 30% of the allocation of this factory in this location and this factory in that location. So it's like, how do you use the systems of operation that our industry also already operates in, which is like subcontracting, to create a supply chain that is somewhat like the Tesla of just-in-time ordering.
Well,
So
that might give construction like a better future too. It sounds like better competition will come out of that because you can't really monopolize. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Yeah, I think it's like a really interesting thing because you are seeing like these prefab or these, especially the prefab shops, which are like standardizing components for their own projects. It's like, hey, can we open that to the wider audience? And can we allow more of the industry to like purchase product from us as an intermediary? And I think that's really where it kind of comes down to of like first you sell to your own company as like a prefab if you're vertically integrated, and then you sell to everyone else. So we've just really got to think about that asset heavy or owning manufacturing plants doesn't seem to have worked, but there are people who already own them and service a large part of the industry. Can we expand the geographical or regional footprint?
What did you hear when you talked to GCs in the Formwork Labs context, or just clients of these startups? What was like some common feedback? Less clicks, make it easier. Like, I bet those kinds of things. What else?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, like just being able to use the product in a way that makes sense. Yeah, like the less clicks, like obviously product vision things. But like what I found interesting is quite often, or not quite often, but a couple of times the clients actually were like, hey, like what you're building is interesting, but it's adjacent to another problem that we have. By the way, here's this problem that we've been trying to solve internally, and we just haven't been able to figure it out because we're a construction company, we're a software company. And they go, we'll pay you to build this solution for us. So we'll partner with you and it's like an adjacent feature to your existing one, and you can sell that to the rest of the industry. Maybe there, and like we'll beta test it for you, but we're really struggling with it. So that was really interesting. Of hey, like you're getting this pull from the industry of this is what you thought they wanted, but now they actually want this like adjacent module to what you're building, and they're willing to pay you for the development costs and then pay you a subscription fee because it's such a critical pain point for them. And I think like that's something that you don't get until you've had 3 or 4 or 5 conversations where they trust you and they're like, hey, like we know this team can build because we're using their product. Yeah, it's good, but it's not like for a critical pain point. Here's something adjacent that we really, really want you to build.
That seems like a need, because when I hear people talk about like the Procores and Autodesks, those like big software in our industry, most of the time it's like, hey, like they have a good system, it just doesn't work for me, and it's like that customization that Procore and Autodesk might not be able to do for everybody is happening with the smaller startups, which I think is great. I think that's an awesome ecosystem to be in, where clients are getting to be like, hey, could you do this too? And it's a win-win for everybody. Yeah. Do you feel like, what do you think? Let's outline, maybe some people are listening to this and they're like, wait, does construction really need to innovate? Which I would imagine nobody's saying that, but what did you see as like, oh my gosh, this industry really needs to change that?
So like one of our last articles actually was like a request for startups of like 15 different like zones of opportunity or like problem areas of, hey, like this is something, or these are areas that we would love to see founders building in. And we talked to like 10 different experts across the industry. And I think like from there was some interesting conclusions. I think 2 which really came to mind, and I'm like, we could touch on AI if you want to, but I'm actually not going to say the AI ones. The first one was design build. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the US, design build is becoming more and more popular. So I think by 2028, they were saying 47% of all construction spending is on design build versus design bid build, which is super interesting because now you kind of have this verticalization of the designer and contractor. Pre-construction becomes more important, but then also how do you immediately get feedback from the contractor on design changes as how they impact constructability? Because like usually, like when I've done design, it's like you do the design and then you bid out the design, and then the contractor goes and looks at it and tries to make it like, hey, like this is the sequence of building it. But like what we could actually do is design it in a way that it's easier to build. But me as a designer who doesn't spend a heap of time on site or hasn't built things like on site as much, doesn't actually know how to build it in a constructible way. So that constructability component has to be incorporated earlier, because you can't increase your bid. Because when you're bidding on it, you look at it and go, this is really tough. Let's increase the bid price. You can't do that in a design construct. So there's all these challenges associated with this new project delivery method. And then the other thing that no one talks about is like, yeah, like we have all these solutions for new builds or greenfield development, but really a lot of spending's on renovation with energetic retrofits. And in the EU, by 2050, they have an objective of no net new land takes. They're going, hey, like we're not rezoning anything. If you build a greenfield development, you need to like cut down something and reforest it. So there's so many considerations with like, how do you do like the building scanning? The building data isn't actually complete. There's heritage listings across all of Europe, and renovation is incredibly challenging because it's unique on almost every component. And like who's building a best-in-class renovation design solution, or like even just like renovation and restoration contractors is like a growing trend. So that was like 2 kind of interesting things that I saw coming up, and especially with contractors talking about design build as, hey, like pre-construction is more important, design build's more important, and it's not traditionally what we've built for.
Yeah. Do you know the numbers? Because I imagine renovation or reconstruction, however you want to call it, is more prevalent than new construction.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers in the US. I know in the EU, they have like the Energy Performance of Building Directive, which is associated to energetic retrofits. And they said like, I think by 2033, it's either like 16 or 23% of all buildings, the worst performing buildings, need to be renovated across the EU. Like it's some ridiculous number. So there's like a massive need for it. And you are seeing like energy retrofit, like vertically integrated contractors of like, lead gen on their website. They do like an automated design. They have contractors that are a contractor network. That's happening a lot in the EU, but obviously in the US, the regulation isn't as supportive.
Yeah, because I bet too, if you filtered construction projects, you filtered out new construction, I bet you'd see that the problems in construction are more so in reconstruction than they are in new construction too.
Yeah.
The cost overruns, the time delays, all of that is happening more often when the existing conditions, when there are existing conditions, it's going to lead to problems. That's just like what I've
and
seen.
Like bad data, right? Like no one has the amount of job sites that it's like literally like we have zero idea what's on the ground. Like we're just digging holes and hoping we don't hit anything. Or like we're digging little test bits and going, all right, there's something here. So we assume that goes for the next 20 meters. Like the amount of times that you hit unknown underground services, like I'm sure you would have seen this as well. It's like, unless you've worked in construction, you don't realize as soon as you open the ground, it's a risk.
True. Yeah. Where else do I want to go? I mean, are you back in Australia, by the way?
Yeah, I'm in Australia. Yeah, did a bit of travel before. So saw a bit of people in Europe and India. So that was really cool, like various startups and things like that.
Did you miss the conference scene? Was that like you didn't get to go to
I haven't
AU
been. Yeah, I haven't been to AU. I haven't been big personally on the conferences. And I think that was like one in Australia. Like we have a couple of conferences coming up, so I'll go to that. But I don't know how you feel about conferences, but generally speaking, I found that you're going to have a more meaningful conversation if you like reach out on LinkedIn, jump on a call for 30 minutes versus, hey, I just see you, I shake your hand, it's just good. I think it's like meeting in person at a conference post an initial conversation is really good, or just like wherever you meet. But yeah, conferences really haven't been something that I've been like, have really worked for me.
I feel you there. No, I much prefer a one-on-one, and I like the conferences, but it does feel like kind of self-indulgent in my opinion. In any case, I wanted to dig in more on like the storytelling aspect that you were bringing up, because that's something, it's probably the reason I started my podcast, is I think our industry as a whole would benefit from just all of us being better storytellers, even in our emails to each other, even in the way we talk in a meeting. And I think there's just something to like be able to go through a beginning, middle, and end and have it resolve. I so often see, especially the analytical people in our industry, not really be able to explain themselves in a compelling way. And I would love to encourage everyone, like, take a class, try writing. I think probably maybe you can speak to just like ideas start to develop as you're writing them out. What is your experience of this? What do you think the value is there?
No, I completely agree. I know like at when I was like working in the innovation role, one of like my coworkers, she ran a storytelling workshop, and that would just get people across the business for business case development internally and getting support. It was all about storytelling. But I think like something that like surprised me is that people don't always practice or have prepared stories. So if you're a founder, you should have your, elevator pitch, just say it's 30 seconds, dialed in. And that means you take a half day and you write yourself a script and you memorize that script and you speak that script aloud so that you have it down pat and you can tailor it to your audience. And I think that's actually what it comes down to, is like the people who can storytell on the spot, like that's so impressive, but I can't do that. And I think, that comes with skill and practice. But if you know there's certain things like your introduction, what your company does, and like you have 30 seconds, you have 2 minutes, you have 5 minutes, you should have written it down and built a story and figured it out and talked to your family, your partner, your friends, and be like, does this make sense? Is this clear to you? Do you understand what I'm saying? And you have that memorized so that when someone asks you, oh, who are you? Or, hey, what are you building? You can say it very clearly and succinctly. And I think it's actually just a matter of, taking the practice, doing it, having it memorized and being ready to go when it's there, instead of like being caught out flat-footed. Because that's happened to me a bunch of times of like, hey, like, oh, what's your story? What's your background? I'm like, oh, and you just forget, right? And you can't build a nice little note.
I was going to bring up that example because I think that statement is for everybody. I think if you're ever interviewing for a job, even if you just want to make more friends, I think you should think about like when people ask me like what my background is, what do I usually say? And like for me, I did ask that question like 10 years ago and wonder like, maybe I should formulate my own version of my story. Like, oh, this is what happened to me. I should just always know that. I shouldn't practice it. But then I was like, no, I want to be able to tell people like the truth in my story, but I want it to flow. And I think sometimes I struggled with, is that manipulative to like
Yeah.
think too much about the story I'm telling? But then I'm going to share something that's a little vulnerable here for everybody. Since I started this podcast, I've been recording intro about me episodes that I delete. Like, and I do it over and over. Every time I do it, I hate it. And I'm just like, oh, I can't release that. And maybe I will someday. Everybody, if you really want me to release one, put some pressure on me and maybe I will. But every time I record it, I'm just like, that didn't do it. Like, it didn't work for me. But I keep doing it because I'm like, this is good practice. Eventually, one day I'm going to have the story that's really my story and I'll be proud of it and I'll release that one. Yeah, I don't know. Talking to yourself in the mirror, I think is good.
Sucks.
It sounds silly, but it's important. Or if you can talk to your significant other and just be like, hey, I have a client meeting. Can I perform it to you? Do that, people, because it will benefit you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like there's so many AI tools around that. And like going back to your about me point, it's like, yeah, it's one of the tough things is like posting on LinkedIn, right? You have always cringe and you're like, who the hell's going to do that? But I think also there's a big part of like curiosity and people just going, hey, like people resonate with the parts of the story that you say or that they do. And like for me, I'm like, yeah, I want to see that because like for me, I'm like, actually, I don't know you're about. Like I've talked to you and I've heard parts of it, but I wouldn't have heard it in your own way when you're telling like a truly like a longer story. And I think that's really important. And it's valuable because you're going to get more people like understanding who you are and what you're doing. And then also on the flip side of it, I think something that's really like I found interesting is like when you start doing that conference circuit or the happy hours associated with it is, you know, just having a few go-to phrases to open up a conversation is actually something that really I find helpful because like in different contexts, people talk about different things and like, you know, for a conference, it's like, oh, did you see that session? Oh, that was really good. Like something to just open a conversation because like once the conversation's open, I find it easy to talk to. But like opening a conversation can be challenging. So I think like before every event, and you know what type of event and what type of people they are, just like jot down like 3 to 5 questions that you can be like, you can just walk up to someone and be like, oh, like it's, you know, it's like, oh, like why are you here? Like, you know, how do you know Seth? Or like, you know, why, like, what do you do? Like just a question, a couple of questions that allows you to start and kick off a conversation or like continue a conversation can be really, really helpful.
Totally agreed. I do want to get into AI, and I wasn't really avoiding it, but I think there's so many parts of it we have to talk about. But I want to talk about just like the overuse of the word. You mentioned, actually, before we get into that, you mentioned the opposite in your recent post that you were saying when you did a bunch of research on like posts that go viral, and it was like put Alice's face and mention AI and it tends to work. Why do you think, is that still working, by the way?
Yeah, well, I think one, Alice has a really good like face recognition and network, and people just see, oh, Alice, I'll click it. I trust her. But the AI thing is, I think what I've noticed with Alice is she's like, I don't want to say she's anti-AI, but like she is a little bit more on the skeptical side in like some of the video snippets that we've recorded of like, hey, like make sure it provides real value. And I think that's just a refreshing take, which a lot of people resonate with in the sense of like everyone's going AI this, AI that, like just put AI on it. And it's like, well, you know, like AI has the same problems as any technology, right? Like you can't just use software. It has to be relevant to our use case. It has to provide us ROI. It has to be beneficial. And like just if you have someone who's kind of saying something slightly contrary to the norm and everyone's kind of thinking about with AI, like if someone came up to me and was like, oh, I built an AI solution, I'd be like, go away. You're kind of pissing me off now. But if you were like to me, hey, like I built, you know, a solution for material tracking and I go, oh, how does it work? It's like, yeah, like we used AI and that actually helped us to solve the problem because normal software algorithms or whatever couldn't do it. I'm like, all right, that makes sense to me. So it's like starting from the problem statement, then using AI as like the best solution for it. And I think that's what she's saying is like not just AI everything. It's like been very skeptical, not very skeptical, but more realistic of, hey, like AI can't work because it doesn't understand construction. And if I ask AI to, hey, like, can I use aluminium on my project? Well, no, or yes, it has no idea. It doesn't know if you're a specialty contractor. It doesn't know if you're a GC. It hasn't read the spec. So just being realistic. If you do it correctly right now, AI is such a hype topic that doing anything that feels contrary gets you pretty good engagement.
Going back into that recent post, I wanted to talk about that, just like the importance of getting attention and how you do it. And you've probably learned a lot about it from last week in Contech too, but do you want to talk about how to get attention?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it really comes down to what you're trying to achieve. I think everyone has their own personal style. And in a world where software costs continue to get cheaper because of AI, being able to acquire customers more cheaply is the most valuable thing. And in construction, when you think about what gets you acquired, at least for me, and what I think works personally, is the idea of being like an expert or just showcasing that one, you're learning, but two, that you do know your stuff and you can have a good conversation with people. And I think like if I was, a reality capture founder, I want you to be posting about, we learned this from a customer, or we learned this about reality capture. We built our product in this particular way, so that if I'm buying a reality capture solution, I'm not going, hey, like I'm dealing with someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. I'm dealing with someone who I can bring on as a partner to my project, and they will make my project improve because they've learned so many tips that they can apply to my project. So it's just really showcasing, hey, you're from the industry, you know that knowledge, and being really clear on who your target market is. So this is my ideal customer persona. It's an executive at a mid-sized contractor with this size of revenue, and my target project is the data center project of this type. And this is how it works. And this is like the information I provide for that. And you find that people really resonate with well thought out content, and they'll engage with that. So I think that's a good way to take attention. And then the second part, I don't know if you've noticed this, is like LinkedIn slowly becoming Instagram. Have you started to see that? Like I've seen a rise in like influencer posts, which are like photos of themselves and then like talking about like a backstory. Nothing wrong with that, but I just look at it sometimes. I go, what's going on with LinkedIn? Rumors is like, it's harder to grow on other platforms, and like LinkedIn is becoming more social than professional. Like there's a weird intermix there. And it's just hard to make technical content, on a consistent basis, right? So you're starting to see like the true rise of these Instagram kind of influencers where they have a niche which is related to professional, but we're building parasocial relationships in the terms of, hey, like, I know your backstory. I know how you got into construction. I know the types of projects that you're doing. I know the conferences that you're at. I know what you're struggling with right now. So you're really starting to see like people being more vulnerable in their professional experiences, which is kind of interesting because that's a very effective way to build friends. Like if you're being like a businessy about it, but it's a very effective way to build friends at a large scale, and advertisers actually want that because people are more likely to buy from people they trust and people they know rather than just people putting out like generic or very technical content.
That makes me wonder, do you think LinkedIn is destined to become more and more like the other social media platform?
Potentially. I think there's always going to be a professional element, but you are really seeing like, there's a lot of money, not a lot, but there's a decent amount of money being thrown in the influencer space. So like, the sponsoring of LinkedIn influencers is starting to get more and more expensive. And there's like influencers out there who they're not making a crazy amount of money, but they're making a decent amount of a living based off their LinkedIn. And I think that's going to become more important. And I think if you're, a savvy founder or a co-founding team, I think you should have a strategy for each of you posting to get different things. Like on one side, it might be to get customers, but even just to hire, like your HR manager, your head of sales, like they should be talking about what it's like to work for them. So it's a lot cheaper to acquire talent, and you're going to pull people from the construction industry who are curious and going, hey, like I want to jump over to construction tech, but I'm scared. I don't know what it looks like, but I know that when I read, da da da's content, I know what it's like to work for them, and they understand construction, and they're really helping customers, so I want to join them. And you take away a referral fee, which is like 15 to 20% of a first year salary that a recruiter is going to charge. So even that in and of itself, if you hire 2 or 3 people from your network, you're gonna make back your time very quickly.
Who do you think in a let's give the example of a construction company or even a construction tech company. I'll just give you my opinion first and feel free to disagree with it, but I would like to see more of the employees posting and less of the company posting. And if you're going to have a podcast, I think it should be a person's podcast, not a like I just don't listen to the company podcast. I don't really read the company LinkedIn mainly because I'm not interested. Do you think that's the case, or is there? Yeah,
No,
you give.
definitely agree. Like that's what we tell like anyone. Like we've been doing a bit of marketing agency work for startups, and every time we do, that's what we tell them, right? And like it's not just a trend within our industry; it's a broader trend. So like, if you look at the general media landscape, you're seeing big kind of anchors or news hosts punch out and start their own companies. So we're seeing the rise of independent media on Substack. So like, from Business Insider or from The Hill, Breaking Points, left, and they've become one of the biggest news channels on YouTube. So you're seeing independent media actually rise to the top because people want to listen to people and they don't trust companies. Like I don't trust a company, but hey, Seth, I know you. I feel like I know you because I've listened to your episodes. I know your biases. And everyone has biases, but as long as I know that and I'm aware of that, I'm willing to listen to you. And I think, something that is really interesting to me is just like the idea of like bounty programs for your employees of, hey, like whoever gets the most engagement this month gets $1,000, or, creating and incentivizing content at scale and then giving like broad workshops around, hey, this is how to create content to your people. I know there's actually one agency which has done it for a startup in our industry that like has supported them in creating content. But that's something that we've been thinking about doing is like, hey, like, if you have 20 people, we sit in a workshop, we tell you how to create the content, we support you a bit, and then we say, hey, like, bounty program. Whoever gets the most engagement or the most follow, whatever metric for this month gets $500. Next month, maybe it's higher, maybe it's different. And I think that's a really great way to incentivize like this grassroots movement for your company because no one's reading the company page. Like that just doesn't happen. And you got to pay to like boost your engagement on the company page. But, if the random like, customer service manager at a company is posting content, I'm like, oh, that's super interesting. I didn't expect that. They must love the company, to be able to be incentivized to do that. So I think that's a really interesting strategy, which is coming up.
I love it, man. I think we should do this again. I don't want to keep going because we could go on forever, but thanks for coming on. And do you want to have people reach out just to your LinkedIn or send people to your newsletter or both?
Yeah, both. That'd be great. Yeah, like if you ever, need anything or want a question, I'm always like pretty accessible on LinkedIn. So just add me, drop me a note. And then I write a newsletter called Last Week in Contact, just helping, solve my own pain point of what are the solutions out there? How do we actually adopt the solutions? Because when I was on site, I just hated doing things the long way and like manually doing things. So I always wanted to know what was out there. And then I wanted to know, well, how do I actually convince the company to pay for it? And then how do I get my entire team to do it? So that's what we're trying to solve it with, a weekly post and then a bi-weekly like guest article on adoption best practices.
It's a really good read, and it's my favorite way to just be like, I'll be honest, I haven't read every single one, but every time it comes out, I glance at it because I'm like, something from this will be one of those stories I'm rehearsing to talk to someone about that will be a good conversation because your stuff, it's usually timely, but it's also good concept. So everybody check it out. Thanks for coming on. We'll talk soon, Bhragan. Thanks.
Thank you.